Could I have everyone's attention, please? Could I have everyone's attention, please? There is a gentleman who left his phone. A gentleman who left his phone in the restroom. Actually, I have two cell phones. Oh, that's mine. I have a cell phone here up for grabs. Anyone? All right, well, when you figure out you've left your cell phone, just come see me.
The mechanical genius strikes again. Good morning. And welcome to this celebration of God's creation. We are so happy to have you here. By way of context, this event is part of our plan to respond to the encyclicals of Pope Francis, Laudate Si and Laudate Deum. 3 years ago, our leadership team asked us to start serious work in response to these calls of our Holy Father. So we developed a steering committee, which we call the Dorothy Stang Initiative. It is the steering committee that sponsors this event this morning. This is our second eco-spirituality event, and they have two parts. The first part is input on spirituality, so that we all grow in closeness to Christ, who authored this beautiful universe of ours. And the second part is more practical. There will be a break between parts. So it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Dr. Sue Sack is a theologian, farmer, teacher, dancer, and spiritual director. She has multiple graduate degrees in theology, ministry, education, and spiritual direction, and has written extensively about the thought of Teilhard de Chardin, as well as the intersection of spirituality and the natural world. Her book, Teilhard, Christ and Hope in the 1960s, was published by Catholic America Press in 2019. She and her husband have, over the years, restored to beauty a small 175-year-old organic farm, which they call Lilac Woods. And on that farm, they raised 4 sons. And there is a wonderful tree house there to prove it. So it is my pleasure today to welcome Dr. Sack.
Good morning. It is such a delight to be here. And I thank Teresa and Sister Marianne for inviting me out of the blue. It was quite a surprise and really quite wonderful. It's been a long time since I've been asked to speak on Teilhard in this way. And I was telling Teresa, it's probably been close to 10 years, I feel like, since I've spoken on him in person. So I'm so grateful for your presence. It gives me great hope, especially this week, I will admit. It gives me great hope. My husband said, you ought to make frames for them so they can hold them up so they look like they're on Zoom. But when I was asked to come from Dayton, northwest of Dayton, actually, I spent a lot of time thinking and considering what did I want to speak about, because I could talk for hours on Teilhard. And I'm curious how many of you know something about Teilhard or have read anything on him? Very impressive, great. All right, well, hopefully we won't disappoint this morning then. Maybe you should be up here giving this. But I thought, we could get very detailed as to his science and his theology and how it all works together. But the thing with Teilhard, especially if you're not real familiar with him, is because he was a mystic, and because he was a French mystic, he has some real idiosyncrasies, doesn't he? And if you're not used to his way of thinking and speaking, it's very easy to get lost very quickly. And he was a scientist who was trying to put into words these experiences he had and the theology that was rising up in him as a result of it. And so he very often just came up with new words, these neologisms. I'm reading Teilhard via Iliadelio with another group right now, and a number of them in there are lawyers and engineers, and they're like, this is not making any sense. I said, you've got to really delve into both the time frame in which he lived, as well as why he wrote what he wrote, and what he was seeing, literally what he was seeing. So they tell me one of my gifts is translation, to be able to take very complex concepts and turn them into something people can understand. So hopefully that's what we'll be doing today. I don't want to overwhelm you with a lot of other stuff, but want to give you something that you can take away and that you can use positively in your own life today, okay? So, I'd like to start with what I find to be one of the most beautiful of Teilhard's writings. And actually, this is the way I was introduced to Teilhard. I was a sophomore at Carroll High School. Yeah. And we were required, I was taking French, and we were required to read a French author and to present him. And my French teacher was a sister of Notre Dame, Sister Mary Jean, who was about this tall, and I think even at that time she was 80 years old. I loved her dearly. But I couldn't decide who to read. And she came to me and she handed me Teilhard's Mass on the World. And she said, I think you'll really like this. And I fell in love with it, I really did. She knew at that time already how weird I was. But anyway, so we will start with just the first few verses from Teilhard's Mass on the World. Since once again, Lord, though this time not in the forest of the Ain, but in the steppes of Asia, I have neither bread nor wine nor altar. I will raise myself beyond these symbols, up to the pure majesty of the real itself. I, your priest, will make the whole earth my altar, and on it will offer you all the labors and sufferings of the world. Over there on the horizon, the sun has just touched with light the outermost of the fringe of the eastern sky. Once again, beneath this moving sheet of fire, the living surface of the earth wakes and trembles, and once again begins its fearful travail. I will place on my paten, O God, the harvest to be won by this renewal of labor into my chalice. I shall pour out all the sap which is to be pressed out this day from the earth's fruits. My paten and my chalice are the depths of a soul laid widely open to all the forces which in a moment will rise up from every corner of the earth and converge upon the Spirit. Grant me the remembrance and the mystic presence of all those whom the light is now awakening to the new day. Over every living thing which is to spring up, to grow, to flower, to ripen during this day, say again the words, "This is my body." And over every death force which waits in readiness to corrode, to wither, to cut down, speak again your commanding words, which express the supreme mystery of faith. This is my blood. Well, it wasn't supposed to do that. That's what you call a mic drop.
It's fine on here. Yep.
Did I turn it off here?
No, you didn't do anything. Oh, isn't technology wonderful?
It's wonderful till it doesn't work. Oh, there we go.
Loose wire, loose wire. But see, that gave us time to let new people in, so perfect. Loose wire. Loose wire.
Isn't that beautiful? So Teilhard wrote this in 1923. He was in China for the first time, and he was in the Ordos Desert on the Feast of the Transfiguration when he found himself in this place. Now, you probably gather from that, if you don't know Teilhard very well, he was a priest. In fact, he was a Jesuit priest who had been born 1881 in the Auvergne in France, which is in the volcanic region of south-central France, southeast of Bordeaux. Died in 1955 in New York City, alone, as we will talk about in a minute. The sixth of 11 siblings. Yeah. And the de Chardin should tell you, his family is of landed gentry. His family name is Teilhard, but that's where he's from, kind of like the Namur, right? So he goes by Teilhard. And they were genteel poverty, most definitely. But he's related to Voltaire, which is kind of interesting. And from a very young age, he found himself torn between these two loves. His mother was very religious. She introduced him to the devotion of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. So he felt drawn toward that. However, his father, who was an amateur naturalist, would take him out rock hunting and introducing him, to the nature in the area, and he just loved that. And trying to reconcile in the late 19th century this love for the earth with the love for spirit was really difficult for him because he didn't think he could do both. You left to love one or the other. The dichotomies at that time were very, very strong, right? Could not do both. But he had studied with the Jesuits as a young boy. He felt very drawn to that lifestyle. And eventually, he did go into the Jesuit order and was trained by them. And spent some time on the Isle of Jersey studying geology, as well as, of course, philosophy and a little theology. Was ordained in 1911, went back for graduate degrees in 1912 in Paris, and then World War I started. And he was in the thick of World War I in the trenches. And this was truly a turning point in his life, because he had already had some mystical experiences, but he felt that God was so present in the suffering and the camaraderie of the war in a way he could never truly explain. Wrote a great deal about it, you know, but it affected him deeply and immensely. The idea of God being present even in the midst of all that violence and turmoil. And slowly he started, as I said, to write. He wrote a lot to his cousin Marguerite, the first of many feminine friendships that he had throughout his life. But after the war, and when he finished his doctorate, he was teaching in Paris, you know, finishing up there, and had the opportunity to go on a tour, among other places, to China, which is where Mass on the World started, or was written. Right? Came back to France, and the big troubles began again. They were already kind of wondering about this guy and what he was writing. He was very, very enamored with and already writing about evolution, which, you know, in the very early 20th century, that was kind of suspect, quite suspect already. We all probably can remember the Scopes trial, right? And the other Dayton, in Dayton, Tennessee. So it's that time, and nobody's quite sure what to think of that. But he wrote an essay or two on his thoughts concerning the evolution of the universe, and suggested that perhaps the story of Adam and Eve in the Old Testament was not quite true. Not a historical fact, but a fable of a sort. And that was not appreciated by his superiors. So they thought it was be a good thing if he went away for a while again. So he was sent back to China, where for the most part, he stayed for 20 years and was not permitted for long periods of time to go back to France. So he was there all the way through World War II, you know, which about killed him, not knowing what was going on with his home in France, right? So he went back to China, where the ironic part of, a part of it was that, oops, what am I doing? Sorry. While he was in China, he did 5 expeditions through China, created the first real maps of China, received numerous scientific awards, global awards, was part of the team that discovered Peking Man, and received all this notoriety. So kind of very ironic. That's how God works, right? But he continued to write. He continued to ask the Jesuits to allow him to publish his writings. They continued to say no. So what happened is he would write, he would have someone, or he would type things up, it would be mimeographed, and then it would be sent all over the world. So, you know, things were disseminated under the table. And he became quite well known already, even without publishing anything officially. So at the end of his life, he became very ill, had cardiac issues, some heart attacks. He wanted to stay in France and die, and they refused to allow him to stay there, and instead sent him to New York City, where he spent his last few years, ended up dying basically by himself on Easter Sunday. And there was one person at his funeral. So he is buried in the Jesuit cemetery along the Hudson River in New York, on what is now the grounds of the Culinary Institute of America. It is a beautiful spot. I've been there, and it is astonishing because you can tell which is his grave because it's surrounded by flowers. The ironic part, again, another irony of this, is that in his last years, his secretary and some friends convinced him to sign all of his writings over to his secretary, Jacques Mornier. And she went and started publishing everything after his death. So in 1959, the first copy of The Phenomenon hit New York City and almost immediately sold out. You know. In the 1960s, and this is what my book is on, in the 1960s, over 500 works, his own and others on him, were published just in the United States. So those of you who encountered Teilhard in the 1960s, how many of you? Yeah, there you go. That's why. He was everywhere in the market. That's when the American Teilhard Association, which still exists and is still very active, started. And, also, almost so much of the theology that is developing today, the theology of Vatican II, has some foundation in Teilhard's work, in his thought. And there are numerous people who have taken that further today. And I mentioned Ilia Delio, the Franciscan. She's certainly one, as is Richard Rohr, John Hott. Some of you might know those names, okay? So they are all still making use of his work. Okay. I do want to mention in 1962, a monetum was issued on his work from the Holy See. When a monetum is just a warning. It was a warning that you need to be very careful if you read these things because it might lead you astray. That just seemed to accelerate the number of books sold. Okay, you can tell I'm a teacher because this is when I would usually stop and say, okay, are there any questions? But we will wait for questions till afterward. So keep them in mind. I don't know how many of you have ever been to the campus of the University of Dayton, but that's where I did my doctoral work. And one of the Marianist brothers back in the late 60s created this sculpture, a guy by the name of Henry Setter. And this represents Teilhard's Omega Point. It sits in front of the library on campus. And for Brother Setter, what this represents, is Teilhard's progress toward a particular point, the telos, the end point of our lives here in this universe. It's about following God's call wherever it might lead. And it is about the strength. Teilhard was about those things that endure. He talks about the dieu de fire, the God of iron. So this is made out of, at least in part, an iron alloy. This endures, the endurance of creation. And going back, I wanted to talk a little bit about the intersection of Teilhard's eco-spirituality, thank you, Teilhard's eco-spirituality in the Eucharist, since this has been the year of the Eucharist. So, he's a priest, and he is participating and presiding over Eucharist every day throughout most of his life. And certainly he was certainly orthodox in that way. in his understanding of Eucharist. And yet, it was also a very broad perspective. Because for him, the Eucharist is about far more than just the consecrated bread. It's about far more than just the actions of the priest. It's about far more even than the word proclaimed or the people present. It is about the inclusion of the entire created world, all of creation, which has been present from the very beginning in the cosmic Christ. So he gathers up all of these things when he presides at Eucharist and does the consecration of the bread and the wine. They are representative to him of the things of the earth and all the peoples of the earth through time, whoever they might be. Right? So it extends, this Eucharist extends throughout space and throughout time. And one of his quotes there is at the bottom, that Christ has a cosmic body that extends throughout the universe. So he is reintroducing from the very early church, from many of the letters of Paul, including Ephesians and Colossians, the prologue to John, that Christ is somehow incarnate in creation. That in some way this was the first incarnation of Christ into the created world. And he says, at the same time though, yes, but Jesus, yes, this personal Christ, who then was incarnate, for us now just over 2,000 years ago. And at the same time, he hangs on to that Sacred Heart of Jesus and what all that represents for him. And how does he work this out? That's one of the big questions. Because what he is teaching is this mysticism, what he called the mysticism of action and transformation. A communion with God through the world. Not apart from the world, not trying to escape the world, but very much enmeshed in the world. He was such a man, he was so intuitive to start with, okay? Very, very big picture. Very much a man of integration, of bringing things together, all kinds of dualities. And so he sees everything constantly trying to bring things together to become what he called divinized, to be overflowing with Christ. And the book in which he most writes about this is Le Milieu Divin, Divine Milieu. This is his spiritual guide, for those who want to live this out in the world. If you have not read this book and you're interested, I would suggest this might be a good place to start with Teilhard. It is a set of spiritual practices. And he talks a great deal about how to see this, how to see the overflowing of God in the world. And he dedicates it to those who love the world. He sees matter at its incendiary stage, full of fire. And for him, fire is the love of God and our love for Christ. So seeing, how to see the divine milieu, how to see Christ in the stuff of the everyday. And he's talking here, of course, about Christ in the cosmic sense, the Christ that transcends time and place, the Christ who always has been, who always will be. Now, this is his foundation. Learning how to see that truly God is present in all things, in all creation, in all activities of your day, in all your suffering, in all your struggles. Sometimes he also calls this the divine diaphany, the divine showing. Another one of his quotes there, I saw as though in ecstasy that through all of nature, I was immersed in God. And so he becomes aware in himself slowly and almost reluctantly of what we would call a panentheistic way of seeing, of being Christian. And I'm going to talk what that means in just a minute if you're not familiar with it. Now, a very strong nature mysticism. This is one of the quotes from him I just adore. He says, by virtue of creation, and still more the incarnation, nothing here is profane for those who know how to see. In other words, the world was made good. God saw it and said it was good. The world drips God, he says elsewhere. And so nothing in this world is profane. It's of just the everyday, not imbued with the sacred. Whatever it might be, you know, your work, granite. He talks about the inner energy of granite. Of course, family life. Shopping, even though at times that definitely does not feel sacred. And of course, trees. You know, I said, if trees don't exemplify God, I don't know what does. I'm a tree person. So this has caused many to accuse Teilhard of being a pantheist. That's been flung at him for many, many decades. And so I wanted to just explicate the difference between pantheism and panentheism. There is a difference. So in pantheism, the universe, now we believe that the universe and all things in nature are God. So the tree is God. The lake is God. I am God. You know, Teresa's God. But panentheism, on the other hand, says that everything, without exception, has the fingerprints of God. It has the imprint of God within it. Even those rocks. And if we go back to this idea of Christ being the first incarnation on the earth, you know, right there, everything is imbued with the sacred in his mind. Okay, so, of course it bears, for Teilhard, it bears the imprint of God. This is panentheism. So what is this all, where is this all going? So for him, we, and when I say we, but also all the we's through all the ages and all the ages to come, and all the we's who are the trees and the rocks, and even the darn mosquitoes, are on this journey toward what he called Christogenesis. This is his evolutionary process. And he said, we are evolving toward more consciousness. We are becoming something yet more, right? And what we are becoming, where we are going, the teleology, the direction of evolution is toward Christ. We are becoming Christ altogether. No exceptions. The cosmic Christ, whom he called the Omega point. So the Alpha started the process. We are moving toward the Omega altogether. And the Omega is drawing us toward that point. But of course, we have that little thing called free will, right? Yeah. So this diagram, and I know it's kind of fuzzy because I blew it up so much, I'm sorry. But you can see down in the lower left corner what that says for Teilhard. We start with cosmogenesis. This is the creation of the entire universe. Some today would call that the Big Bang, right? The process started, cosmogenesis. And after billions and billions of years, he talked about biogenesis, starting with the very earliest creatures, right? Microbes that evolved into something yet more, that evolved into yet more consciousness, and on, until it reached its apogee in humanity. Right? We are, or at least to this point, the pinnacle of biogenesis. However, that's not the end. Far from it. So he also prophesies what he called neurogenesis, which is this creation of a network of knowing and understanding at a very high consciousness, which some today say that, the internet is perhaps a very initial example of where he was going with that. I have to wonder, though, because the more we learn about how creatures that we would consider less than us, like trees and whales and other living creatures, how they communicate with each other, how advanced are we really? But Teilhard said, this is the way we're going. We're going to go through this neurogenesis. He also said the neurogenesis will imply that we, and we'll get to this in just a minute, we will love at a new level too. And that love will then draw us even further to Christogenesis, the Omega. Another point that I love about Teilhard is he says, what you do every day matters. in this process. That all the stuff of the world, your interactions, your work, your loves, your suffering, it all can contribute to Christogenesis. That the stuff of the world is truly holy. And it does not matter who you are. No one person's efforts count more than another person's. No? It does not matter what you do in life so much as how you do it. So when we move and act in love, we are furthering the process of Christogenesis, free will again. When we instead choose to behave like hellions, we're going the other direction, or at least stalling it, okay? So we are truly collaborating with God's creation and God's plan of evolution in our everyday life. That gives me great comfort to know that what I do, even when I'm cleaning out the chicken coop, does matter. You know, that when we plant a garden or we grow food for ourselves or others, that matters. I am contributing in a positive way. Those of you who are teachers, you know, when you deal with reluctant students in a loving manner, that really matters in this process. And it especially matters because it is about carrying on the love of God. So Teilhard was a priest who was all about love. And he said, and I don't know why I don't have this page. Oh, here it is. He calls love fire. That fire can consume us and turn us into something more. And love for God is especially fire. So the love of God that God shows us in creation is meant to be carried elsewhere, and so that this process of Christogenesis can expand and grow and take us to something more, some more consciousness. You know? Fire is what creates further love for the created world. It accepts suffering. It accepts the problems of the everyday. It's about sacrifice, a willingness to give of myself for the good of all the others, and others in a very broad sense, right? This is, he says, this is our mission. This is our mission. This is why we are here. To help in this process through loving and by learning to see this and understand this and integrate this into our everyday life. So yes, it's about my own individual future, but it's for all of us. We can't separate ourselves from the rest of humanity and creation. And he talks about adoration. He says, up until now, to adore has meant to prefer God to things by referring them to God and by sacrificing them to God. Now, adoration means the giving of our life to creative activity, even through suffering and death, and joining that activity to God in order to bring the entire created world to fulfillment by joint physical, spiritual, and intellectual effort and exploration. So going back to the question of the Eucharist, basically what Teilhard is telling us is that the entirety of creation, the entirety of the cosmos is being consecrated, is moving toward consecration in the Omega point. That in a very small way, what the Eucharistic celebration represents is this. And that this is what we need to keep in mind when we participate in the Eucharist. He says we're living in a cosmic Eucharist. Where bread represents growth, blossoming, maturation, and the wine is all that diminishes us, that causes us problems and struggles and suffering and death. So again, Teilhard tried mightily to look at the whole, to bring together the whole, to dissolve dichotomies, to dissolve the separation from humanity and what we call nature, to reconcile us with the created world, to let us see the sacred in all things, to see the mystery behind all things. And I'm going to skip forward rather quickly, the interconnection, very much the interconnection of all things. And he said that if we do not learn to see, if we do not learn to understand and to see the within of the created world, we will perish. And that this is what the church should be doing. Teaching people to see this way. And to love this way. And to live this way. And to recognize that truly we are one. After all, you and I. Together we suffer, together exist, and forever will recreate each other. Thank you. So, we thought it would be a good thing to take a few minutes for you to reflect on what you have heard and to integrate it yourself into the rest of your life today. So I have just a couple of reflection questions, and I want to encourage you to make yourself comfortable for a few minutes, and then I promise you can go get more coffee. So I'd like for you to reflect on where do you most experience the divine diaphany, the divine milieu in your life now? Where is it that God is most present to you? And for sake of this morning, if there's some place in nature that is especially sacred to you, if you could bring that to mind and just reflect on it and consider how God has spoken to you or shown up to you there. We'll take just a few moments to do that. I also want you to consider the process of Christogenesis in your own life. Your evolution toward the omega point. And reflect upon what in your life right now perhaps needs to be changed to ensure that this process happens both for you and for those around you. So we'll take just a moment to think about that, reflect on that. And finally, with all of this in mind, and remembering that place that is especially sacred for you, I'm going to show a short 4 or 5 minute YouTube video of the Mass on the World. And as you hear Teilhard's words spoken, I want to encourage you to remember to hold on to that sacred place. And as he lifts up where he is, to lift up that place and to lift up the people sacred to you in your own life, or the work in your own life, the activities in your life that you would like to offer on your paten this morning.
Myself beyond these symbols, up to the pure majesty of the real itself. I, your priest, will make the whole earth my altar, and on it will offer you all the labors and sufferings of the world. Over there, on the horizon, the sun has just touched with light the outermost fringe of the eastern sky. Once again, beneath this moving sheet of fire, the living surface of the earth quakes and trembles, and once again begins its fearful travail. I will place on my paten, O God, the harvest to be won by this renewal of labor, and into my chalice I shall pour all the sap which is to be pressed out this day from the earth's fruits. My paten and my chalice are the depths of a soul laid widely open to all the forces which in a moment will rise up from every corner of the earth and converge upon my spirit. Grant me the remembrance and mystic presence of all those whom the light is now awakening to the new day. One by one, Lord, I see and love all those whom you have given me to sustain and charm my life. One by one also, I number all those who make up that other beloved family which has gradually surrounded me, its unity fashioned out of the most disparate elements with affinities of the heart. And again, one by one, I call before me the whole vast anonymous army of living humanity, who surround me and support me, though I do not know them, those who come and those who go. Above all, those who in office, laboratory, or factory, through their vision of truth or despite their error, truly believe in the progress of earthly reality, and who today will take up their impassioned pursuit of the light.
This restless multitude, the immensity of which terrifies us, this ocean of humanity whose slow, monotonous wave flows trouble the hearts of even those whose faith is most firm. It is to this deep that I thus desire for all the fibers of my being should respond. All things in the world to which this day will bring increase, all those that will diminish, all those too that will die, all of them, Lord, I will try to gather in my arms so as to hold them out to you in offering. This is the material of my sacrifice, the only material you desire. Once upon a time, people took into your temple the first fruits of their harvests, the flowers of their flocks. But the offering you really want, the offering you mysteriously need everyone to appease your hunger, to slake your thirst, is nothing less than the growth of the world born ever onwards in the stream of universal becoming. Receive, O Lord, the all-embracing which your whole creation, moved by your magnetism, offers you at this dawn of a new day. This bread, our toil, is but an immense fragmentation. This wine, our pain, is no more than a draught that dissolves.
Amen. Again, I thank you.
And Sue, I know I speak for all of us. There are no words to thank you, but only the awareness that the way we live and the way we love will have new fire, and the way we are Eucharist with and to and for each other will never be the same. Thank you so much. My colleague reminded me I'm supposed to be telling you about the break. And we are having a break. It'll be about 15 minutes. And there's coffee and water and tea. And the best news is homemade cookies made in Sister Judy's solar oven. So please enjoy them. And we'll see you back in 15 minutes. Thank you. Oh, and I should tell you about restrooms. Out this door to my left, you will find restrooms down the hall, and out this door to the right as well. And also up on the first floor, immediately above us, to the left and to the right. Good luck.
If we can begin to reassemble and take our seats, please. Can we please reassemble and take our seats? I'm going to channel my mother soon and say, sit down.
Okay.
So
Now-
you're going to introduce Mark.
And then you.
And then me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, can I call you to attention, please? As we begin the second part, all right, thank you. As we begin the second part of this morning of Echo Spirituality, I want to once again contextualize this event by calling to mind that Pope Francis has said to us, it's not enough to do it alone. We must care for our planet, but the challenge is way beyond any one person. It begins with one person, but it cannot end there. So one of the goals of the Sisters of Notre Dame de Namur, in our response to Pope Francis's encyclicals, is to gather groups and to make other partners. We hope that you will be some of those partners. And now I want to introduce a very special partner. M. Shannon, together with his two colleagues, developed a very creative response to Pope Francis's call to all of us. We are so proud of what they have done and very, very proud of their connection to the Sisters of Notre Dame de Namur and our mission. So it's my pleasure to introduce M. Shannon. M.
Thank you, and good morning. Again, my name is Mark Shannon, and I'm joined by Sister Judy Tenzing and Charlie Stenkin, and we are all board members of a small nonprofit called Just Earth Cincinnati. And our mission is to facilitate education and action around the intersecting crises of climate change, biodiversity loss, and the resulting injustices. There are many organizations and efforts involved in the environmental movement. And each one has its own unique perspective, bias, they have their own lenses. Ours is that we believe there is a social justice consideration that needs to be addressed as the world grapples with these issues. The first world nations are the ones most responsible for this crisis, and yet they are the least impacted. And they are insulated enough that they can move their lawn chairs or turn up their HVAC systems to remain pretty comfortable as the rest of the world deals with the consequence. The second bias that we operate under is that there is a an urgency to all of this. And science, if you will forgive me for using that term, has been telling us of that for a long time. And science tells us that we have 4 to 6 years to make some changes and to address these issues. And deregulation will not benefit that process. All of this may be a bit daunting for nice folks who choose to gather with one another on a Saturday morning in Reading. But it's also an opportunity for community. So where do we begin, and how do we decide what to do, and how are we going to choose our goals, and how are we going to measure our successes? And I would suggest that a place to start would be the temperature of the earth. People can use a lot of different lenses, but at Just Earth, we tend to focus on the temperature. One of the fundamental concerns of science and experts in this field is that the surface of the earth is warming. And it's something we've known for quite some time. And all of our exercises, all of our conversations at Just Earth center around what does that mean for us, for the rest of the world, for our neighbors, for our children, for our children's children, and what is our responsibility? In terms of what we know, the surface of the earth is perhaps 2 degrees warmer than it was in pre-industrial America, before the Civil War. And it has been warming ever since, most dramatically since the 1950s. We have data that will tell us that. We know that to be true. And that may not be that frightening, 2, 3 degrees. We can live with that, can't we? But the implications for the world are enormous. Because if we stay the course and do nothing differently than what we are doing now, the temperature of the earth will rise to perhaps 3.3 degrees Celsius, higher than it was in pre-industrial America by the year 2100. And that means that perhaps Hanoi or Dubai will be underwater. Now, they may not be destinations on your bucket list, so maybe we can let them go. But what about Venice, or parts of Manhattan, or the Everglades, or much of Florida, or the Outer Banks? What's your thought on that? And huge areas of the Earth's surface will be uninhabitable and will not be able to grow crops. It will be too warm. There is general consensus that the ice caps are melting, and that's a problem because they perform multiple tasks. One is that surface deflects the sun's rays and sends the heat back into the atmosphere. So as it melts, it doesn't do as effective a job. And consequently, the earth warms and the waters warm. And as the waters warm, they expand and the water comes up. Also, underneath the ice caps are these wonderful ecosystems and microorganisms that feed all of the species in the oceans. And as the ice caps are lost, so are those microorganisms. Similarly, on land, we're losing the insects. And you might be willing to give up a mosquito or two, but they all have a function in this creation, in nature. And they are all involved in feeding other species and in pollination. So we have to even be concerned about the insects. So what are we to do? And at Just Earth, we say we got to talk about global warming. And it's estimated that by the year 2070, 20% of the Earth's surface will be uninhabitable. And consequently, 1/3 of all of humanity will be on the move to find a safer place to live and to raise their families. And I would venture to say we're not doing a very good job with immigration now, and nor is Europe. And what might it look like if 1/3 of all humanity is on the move? So the goal is to keep the temperature from rising more than 2 degrees, and ideally 1.5, above pre-industrial levels. And the good news is that because this planet is a dynamic, living organism, it has the capacity to rejuvenate, to bring life back. And the proof of that can be seen in the ecosystems around Cuba. And the waters and the reefs around Cuba were at risk and dying off like the reefs all over the world until the embargo on Cuba and the isolation that it caused. And all of a sudden, Cuba could not access the chemicals, the fertilizers, the pollutants that were available to all of us. And they were forced to go to their farmers and say, do you remember how you used to grow crops? Do you remember how your fathers grew crops, how they fed their families? And they brought back the old traditions. And the fields began to spring back to life. And gosh, by golly, the coral reef began to grow again, and the seas began to clean up on their own. So there is an incentive and there's proof that it works. So the goal is to cap it at 2% and to recognize that there are some social justice issues associated with that. Because the second and the third world nations are not only suffering now, but they're also asking of us, why is it we cannot use the technology, the energy resources you've used to create a quality of life for your people? Why is that being denied to us? And those are very legitimate questions. Much of what we do at Just Earth is to convene folks around tables to discuss these issues, look at solutions that have been proposed and how they've worked and so forth, and what we can do individually and collectively. We're interested in expanding conversations that are already taking place. We're interested in collaboration. We're interested in meeting new friends. We're interested in butting heads. We're interested in thinking about how can it be done differently. We've assembled and or created exercises from across this country and around the world. Perhaps some of you had an opportunity to look at our displays. There is a program out of MIT that simulates a mock UN General Assembly. We're able to bring people together, present some of the specific issues, the problems. The group is divided up into special interest groups, agriculture, industry, oil, government. What would you propose? How would you solve this problem? Come up with some policies and consider how just are they. And they go back and they have these wonderful conversations. They feel really good about themselves. It's very illuminating. And then we are able to listen to their proposals and enter the findings into a computer, and we can tell them, actually, that's not enough. That is inadequate. Go back and try again. Go back and try again. Maybe you're going to have to really collaborate with one another, which showcases how complex this really is. There's a program out of France where we bring a group of people together. We issue them 7 cards. They each have an environmental phenomenon on them. Put them in order. What comes first? What comes second? What cause and effect? Show us how this works. And they have these wonderful conversations, and they struggle with their answers, and they get the 7 cards laid out, and they feel real good about themselves. And then we issue them 7 more, and then 7 more, and then 7 more. And eventually this very complex picture of an ecosystem that encompasses all of us emerges, and there's a realization that, oh, there is only one ecosystem. And it's really complex, and we are all linked to it. We also have created some contemplative walks where we gather with one another and we just go into nature, and there are reflections along the way. What we're hoping to communicate is that we are not in control of nature. We have not been given dominion over it. And creation is not a beautiful gift to humanity, but in fact, we are an element. We are a part of it, and it is essential for our survival that we understand that we are a part of nature. We also have seeded an art competition. We've done poetry competitions. We want to hear voices that we haven't heard in the past. What do you think? How are you feeling? The takeaway for us is there are 3 strategies that perhaps are most effective as we are looking at these crises. The first is look at what you eat. And if you plan your meals, if you could plan 3 meals a week that do not include meat, it would make a difference. It would save you money, it would save the earth, and according to your physician, it would save your life. But animals take a lot of land to roam, and it takes a lot of land to grow the food to care for the animals, and the animals produce an awful lot of methane gas, which is not good. So consider your diet. Consider how you manage and control, operate your homes, your shelters, your buildings. Electrify. And yes, we can talk about how do we produce our electricity, but electrify. Because how you heat, and more importantly, how you cool your home is critical. And the third is, we all need to learn about the concept of a carbon footprint and a carbon tax. And that's not anything most of us want to talk about, but what does that mean? Can we actually vacuum carbon out of the atmosphere? Can we store it? Can we send it off to the third world? And what is a carbon tax, and what are we willing to pay? But that has been time and again proven to be one of the most effective strategies, is to look at your carbon footprint. And increasing access to energy does not necessarily reduce our use of energy, because the more access we have, historically, the more we use. So we have to think about what are we willing to do to solve the problem. And if one looks at this within the context of all the other things going on in our lives and all the other things going on this week, one might have a tendency to experience some grief. And there's actually a term for eco-grief. And it is important that we not deal with that as individuals and alone. We would encourage you to speak to your family and your friends, and if you have the guts, to strangers about it, and to seek out community. And this is an example of that. But there are groups that look at this through the lens of their faith, through hope, through science, through economic measures, but find a common ground with others and talk about it and do something within your own world about it so that you feel that you have some control over what's happening to you and your world. And there are many, many groups here in this community and around the world that you could partner with. There is Green Umbrella, there's Faith Communities Gone Green, there's Third Act, which is made up of mature individuals who supposedly have great wisdom, who have some time on their hands, and they have some resources, and they're prepared to kick ass and take names. I would encourage you to take a look at Third Act. There are organizations like the Grail, or even in your own faith communities, the Laudato Si committees that are functioning within your own faith communities. And if along the way you need a little nourishment, I would encourage you to consider stopping at Sister Judy's table for an oatmeal cookie hand-baked by a French nun in a solar oven. And I thank you.
As I was listening to Dr. Sack and thinking about this section of our morning together, I thought, how can we not act? And the story that Em just shared with you, the story of Just Earth, is a great story of evolution and creativity. And we need to act, but the issue is so great, we need a lot of the kind of creativity that Mark and his colleagues Charlie Stecklein and Sister Judy Tenzing have brought to the evolution of a pizza parlor to a center in Over the Rhine that does many of the wonderful things he talked about and still more. So I urge you to stop at his table and to learn more about Just Earth. We are very, very proud of our partnership with them. And now it is my privilege to introduce the director of our Peace, Justice, and Care of the Earth work, Teresa Phillips, who will lead us through the rest of the practical application, together with Dr. Sack, of what we have heard today.
Thank you, Marianne. And since I work for the sisters, we have a checklist. So I have appointed people in the audience to pass out this checklist to you, so it should be coming. One of the things that I often encounter in my care of creation work is an overwhelming sense of dread, not only in myself, but in many people I talk to. So the question is always, where do I start? We got a checklist. But again, this is a start, so remember that. And we're offering this to you to help you become an ecologically sensitive household, and as a place to start. Our Dorothy Stang initiative for Laudato Si Action we have 3 areas of focus that were picked by our sisters: the reduction in the use of plastics, the reduction in fossil fuel, and our clean water program. So that's how we organize this particular checklist. That's just a start. And we, in Laudato Deum, Pope Francis tells us that efforts by households to reduce pollution and waste, to consume with prudence, are creating a new culture. We do need big system change. We need a sea change. But by our actions, we are demanding it of our government officials, but also our corporations and people who make these decisions in the first place. So this is a little checklist for you. And if you kind of scan down the plastics one, the one thing I want to point out is it doesn't say recycle. Why doesn't it say recycle? Because plastics recycling, for the most part, some of those, it's hard to recycle, so toss it in this bin, aren't really recycled. They're often not able to be used. So the last thing on that checklist is a challenge to you, and that is to research the realities of plastics recycling and to realize that we need to embrace reusables. One of the things we're focusing on, for our Dorothy Stang initiative, is plastic bags in the grocery store. Stop using plastic bags in the grocery store. And don't use the paper ones either. You know why? Because paper is a very polluting industry. So take your reusable bags. Ones that look like, that was not as smooth as I was hoping. Ones that look like this. Canvas, natural cloth tote bags. These are ones that we had made for our celebration of Dorothy Stang's 20th year of her legacy. It has a quote on her there from her. And I can't think that wasn't the Spirit who inspired us to use this quote, that together we can make a difference. And we do have those available for donation in the back of the room if you would like one. And we're hoping that it helps people to focus on the fact that we have to stop using the plastic as much as possible. It's not possible. A lot of things aren't possible in our current world we live in. But wherever you can identify it and then demand change, that's our way forward. That's our beginning. The second section you see on there is reduction of fossil fuels, and I was nodding along with a lot of things that Mark was saying about, especially about our food choices. But to take that one step further, think about what you don't eat. Think about the part you waste, the food that you waste. Food waste in the United States is 40% of what is sold. You believe that? It blows my mind every time I think about it. So reducing your waste, but then also disposing of it properly by composting. There are composting organizations in Hamilton County where you can drop things off. Some communities are very lucky and they have ones you can pay to come pick it up, but that's not in my neighborhood yet. There are apps you can download where you can share your food waste with gardeners in your community that are looking for things to throw in their compost bins. But when we throw food into the trash bag or down the sink and then send it off to the landfill, it is an anaerobic process of breaking down the food, which creates a lot more methane gas. So think about these things. Think about not throwing your food in the trash can, even when you're tired and your kids are on your, that's just me, sorry. And then our third thing that we focus on is our clean water program. We have water filtration and solar-powered pumps. I should have Keith up here. He knows all this stuff. In 9 sites where our sisters live in Africa. We have a lab here that we have students that come to so that they can make a connection to learn about these things. And that's how we, as the Ohio province, have chosen to address this by supporting our work at our sites in Africa. But there's things you can do as well. And they're listed there also. So this is just kind of, and then some resources at the bottom. So this is kind of checklists for you to hang on your refrigerator and see how many you're already doing and see how many you can add. And then you can send it back to me and say, look, I got 110%, not just 100%. And then the last thing that I would say that we need to do together, this is the community piece of this, is advocacy. Advocacy, advocacy, advocacy. And we have an opportunity for you today to engage in a little advocacy if you'd like. Several months ago, many of us sat and wrote letters together to Kroger about plastic bags. Kroger's promised to end the use of plastic bags in 2025. So we have a letter back there that's saying thank you for that commitment. However, in California when they did this, the grocery stores decided they were just going to use a thicker plastic bag because that's reusable. Well, of course, nobody reused those either, and they doubled the problem because the plastic was thicker. So the second paragraph of that letter says, we start with thank you for doing this great thing, but don't just slip into this other, more destructive behavior. We have one letter, and as many of you can sign it as you want, and we're going to send it off to Kroger on Monday. So we invite you to engage in that little bit of advocacy, and then to continue to grow in your advocacy, to demand it of your grocery stores, to demand it of I'm trying to do it with my pharmacy that sends my son his Dupixent in a styrofoam container every month. So just try, get your voice, start using it, advocate with the people that are making, are packaging things in plastic, and tell them you want something different. So anyway, that's our little checklist. And I want to make sure we have time for questions for Sue because I think that's what's really important. But Sue and myself, if you have any for me. And we do have some microphones. Did we get those out? Yes. And Meg, would you mind walking around with one? Marie Remeko, would you mind walking around with one? If you have questions for myself or for Sue, we are happy to answer them. Or I'm happy to answer it. I don't know, but I shouldn't speak for Sue.
I have. Here I come.
Is this one? So I can spell it again?
I've heard this before, and today it made me just so sad again. I thought one of the things that I'm proudest of about the city of Cincinnati is the Department of Sustainability and the Recycle Reuse Hub, who has just in the last 6 months told us, yes, you can bring your #1 plastics here. So I've also heard that sometimes these aren't helpfully recycled. Can you say something more about that, if it's true?
I can. When I first started reading about the realities of plastic recycling, I cried because I'd been recycling plastics since I was in college. Reliably recycled plastics are 1s and 2s. So 1s and 2s you keep tossing and recycling. Those other things that are unnumbered or that are numbered as a 5 or those sorts of things, plastic can only be recycled once or twice before it degrades and it's useless anyway. And those other plastics are often chemically recycled, and that means they're basically burned and used for fuel. Unfortunately, and they say that there's, it's very contained and all of that, but unfortunately, that has its own problems. So 1s and 2s, yes, definitely. Those other difficult to recycle things, not as much. Some of the like plastic sheet, like grocery bags and that kind of stuff, somewhat, but more often than not, that stuff ends up in the developing world. We sell it or we pay them to take it off of our hands, and then who knows what happens to it then. So yeah, it's very disturbing to know that I've been duped since college about my, but everything else, metal, glass, all of that's great. Get all that stuff in there.
But does that mean that it literally doesn't make any difference if I have to buy something that is in a plastic bottle, for example, that I might as well just put it in the garbage?
Most bottles are ones, so that's okay. But like those clamshells you get your fruit in, well, those are ones too, I think. If it says 5 on the bottom or 6 on the bottom or doesn't have a number, honestly, it breaks my heart to do it, but I put it in the trash. That's why I say search for things that are not in plastic,
Right.
and advocate for those things you need that still are.
I want to, pardon me, for Dr. Sue, I want to talk a little bit more about the cosmic Christ.
Okay.
What I know about Teilhard, I mostly know about from what other people have told me, like Richard Rohr, and other seminars like this that I've attended. Would Teilhard agree that embracing the cosmic Christ also means embracing the values that Jesus the human told us about what it means to live and love well? And would Teilhard agree also then that embracing of the cosmic Christ values makes unity with creation, eternally united with creation, accessible to everyone, beyond dogma, beyond doctrine?
Absolutely. Absolutely. He would not reject any of that. Yeah. No. Teilhard was definitely all about Jesus, the incarnate man, yes, and his teachings about creation and beyond that. Yeah.
Thank you. I guess I was searching for affirmation in that.
Hi, this is for Sue.
Yeah.
With Teilhard living in Asia for so long, do you think Buddhism and some of their concepts of interbeing influenced his worldview and his theology?
That's a hard one. I don't see how they could not have. I do know that that's something he kind of struggled with, how to incorporate other world religions into his own theologies, right? At the same time, if he lived today, I would say there'd be no question, absolutely he could have. But at that time when he lived, he was pushing the bubble just with what he did, right? So, yeah, I can only imagine what would have happened if he'd started talking about other world religions. But, the fact that he said, it does not matter where you are from, it does not matter how you worship, you are part of this movement toward the cosmic Christ. Christianity transcends all these human divisions. I think speaks volumes too. He was very much influenced by at least the early Eastern Church. So I hope that kind of answers your question. Okay.
I'm wondering how Teilhard would have dealt with how do you think he would have dealt with what we're dealing with today, as far as so much hate and so much violence in the world? How would he have told us to act in the midst of this?
And this is why I take such hope from all of you being here today, especially after this week. I think he would respond just as you're responding, to show up and to continue to love. And he would say, he went through World War I. Talk about hate. Talk about violence. Even the way that he was treated by his own church and his own order. And many, many people suggested that he leave the Jesuits and go do his own thing, and he refused. Because he said, there's a way to use this for the good. God is going to use this for the good. I need to stay the course. I need to continue to believe in what I know to be truth and my experiences of the God of fire. You know? And I think that's very true for each of us, and that's what I cling to. It's one of the reasons I love this man. That despite all the suffering in his life, you know, he is one of these truly, even though he's not even on the path to canonization, and who knows if that'll ever happen, I consider him a saint. You know? So stay the course. Do what you can. As Teresa said, we have to do what we can.
We'll take one more. It is 11:30, so I want to respect your time. And of course, both Sue and I will be available. No, we can take, Charlie, we can take yours. Oh, okay, 2 more. And then if you have to, sneak out, we won't judge you.
Hey, hi, my name is Laura.
It's on.
Okay. Hi, this is for Teresa. Thank you so much for this checklist of ecologically sensitive household items. I sit on one of the boards in Loveland for the Tree and Environment Council, and I wonder if that might be a resource for you to come and speak to us in order to get it out into our city's publications.
Sure.
And then wondered as well if you are familiar with the Tree City USA. It's a huge program here in Ohio that helps establish planting of trees.
Oh, fantastic. No, we talk after. I would love to learn more
Excellent.
about that.
Yeah, thank you so much.
That makes sense.
This question is for Sue. When you mentioned the arising of life many millions of years ago, you also mentioned the arising of consciousness. I wonder if that was that Teilhard's perception that the consciousness arose at that time?
Yes, yes. He wrote a great deal about this in his opus, The Human Phenomenon, that from the beginning there was some form of consciousness in the cosmos. And so even very basic forms, the rocks, for example, have an innerness that has this latent consciousness, and that as evolution continued to biogenesis and neogenesis, that consciousness is growing. And it's all mixed up with his idea of love. You know? Higher forms of consciousness are able to love yet more and deeper. Is that good? Okay.
Our mission integration professional just reminded me that these are in the back. They are free. They are all about our mission and our ministries. And we encourage you to take them. And I'm going to let Marianne come back now.
We have been very blessed with Dr. Sachs' thoughts on the why of all of this, and with Teresa's and Mark's input about the how. And now the third part of the equation is all of you. We are convinced that Pope Francis, pardon me, Cincinnati sinus never stops. We are convinced that Pope Francis is called to all of us to form groups to do this, and you are our group. And we hope that you will make your own groups, beginning with your own household when you talk about this checklist, and then other contacts of yours. So together, we are in this work. None of us can do it alone. We are so, so happy and proud that you've joined us. We hope you will come. Our next session will probably be in the spring. We have your emails, so you'll hear about it. And we hope you will come and bring others and spread the word. And we are always a phone call away if there's any way we can help facilitate your gathering of others to hear the why and the how of this ecological crisis that we will address together. Thank you, and have a good day.
Also, we forgot to say this has been recorded and will be available on the website as soon as our lovely digital media coordinator has time, and then we'll send that out to you as well. Don't forget our bags and our letters that you can sign if you so choose. And we hope that you have, oh, thank you, Dottie. I always forget this. See these plastic things? These are not single use. So toss them on that table back there because we will reuse them. So we don't want to waste the plastic. So please turn your name tag in. Ooh, good thing Dottie's here.